What events in your own history led you to become a behavior analyst?
Well, a lot of drift, but it was my college work was done at the University of Virginia, and a professor that very much influenced me was named Starling Reed, and he was very much a behaviorist, but not an operant type. He was Hull, Spence, but a very good and a very open teacher. And our classes were small seminars. We didn't have a lot of graduate students. I think there were a seminar of about 10 that included me and a couple of other names in behavior analysis now, Will Day and Bill Morse. We're part of that 10, which is sort of interesting because the instructor himself was different. But we read behavioral organisms along with a lot of other things, a lot of Hull and Spence writings too. But we were very much influenced by behavioral organisms. Sort of surprising when I go back and look at it and try to understand and read it now. There's so much easier to do than that. But that's basically how I became a behavior analyst.
How were you trained as a behavior analyst?
Well, as I was saying, I was trained mainly by reading behavioral organisms and talking about it in a seminar setting with students, two others of whom became behavior analysts. As I was finishing my graduate work, Bill Garvey had left the graduate program and maybe a year or so ahead of me, and he was at the Naval Research Laboratory heading a little group there, a division or something, and he invited me to come join them, and while the Naval Research Laboratory does basic research, it also has an eye toward some kind of application, even though it's not applied work as such. So to fit that environment, I started trying to think of something that was appropriate. I did a little tracking work. That's sort of, it's standard but uninteresting. And then I decided to look at monitoring of displays or whatever for very infrequent events. So if you're looking for events that don't happen very often, such as a blip on a radar screen or something, you are looking, and the event, if you see it and detect it, it presumably is a reinforcer, it seemed to me, for looking. So I put that idea to work and did monitoring studies with sailors. We have sailors assigned there. It must be the best duty in the Navy to sit in there in a room and wait till you're called to spend an hour in some experiment and go back to the room. Well, that's what we had. We had sailors, and they would come in and monitor a dial looking for a little twitch that was larger than the standard twitches, and that was their signal, and they reported when they saw it. And I could schedule those. We're looking now at schedules of reinforcement. So I could do it in time, a variable or fixed interval. I could do it by, since I was monitoring their looking, I could do it by their looking. This was a very artificial kind of looking. They pressed a little button that gave them a brief flash of light on the display. And so I could do it by number of times they push the little button to see it. I could do DRLs, differential reinforcement of low rates, just about all the kinds of schedules I would play with. These sailors would come in and spend their hour or so doing that, and then get liberty on the weekends. So that it worked out for all of us. So that's really how I started doing operant work with humans.
How did the McCarthy era affect your work?
It took away a lot of my time to listen to and monitor the awful the aftermath of his awful.
Why did you have to spend a lot of time doing that?
Well, nobody made me. It was just that I was concerned about it and very much concerned about it. Yeah. So.
Did anything he found or any of the outrageous claims he made affect your work or affected grants or anything?
Not really. Not in any direct way. I mean, I was just very disturbed by, distracted by these events, and really very much concerned about them.
So you mentioned that you finished your vigilance research. What did you do after that? How did you introduce it to other disciplines or other people?
Yeah, well, I went very self-consciously and meekly to Eastern Psychological Association meeting and took a lot of my data, these fan-folded cumulative records and so forth, with me, and someone knew of my work. I ought to be able to name who it is, but I'm not sure which of the several people it was. And I had collected a few people in my hotel room to come and look at these data, and I had all these nice fan-folded records and so forth, and somebody had said something to Fred Skinner about it, and I'd never met Fred Skinner before, but he came while we were all in there and looked at this work, and so after the EPA meeting, I packed up my stuff and went home, and we were working in the Naval Research Laboratory, and I got a phone call 4 or 5 days after the meeting, and it was Fred Skinner, and he said, "Would you like to come to Harvard and work with me on some, scheduled work?" And I said, "Would I?" And Fred Skinner doesn't take a question as an answer to a question. He said, "Would you?" And I said, "Yes, definitely." And that's how I got there. So I went a research fellow. It was the title, and I was there, I guess, for 8 years as research fellow, which is the limit you can be. You can't be forever in that category at Harvard. In fact, you have to get tenure at the end of 8 years and stay at Harvard. But that's how it all unfolded for me.
How did it morph into the programmed learning? How did it morph into that?
Well, Skinner taught this course, Natural Sciences 114, and he had played with the idea about programmed instruction some already, sample things, illustrations, and I encouraged him that we should use it in his course. And so I would write material, take it to him, and we had these machines in a room with little cubicles that they were set up in.
Describe them.
Well, the original ones is a big box, like so, size of a reasonable size suitcase, brass metal cover, You open the cover and you put in a 24-inch, I think it is, circular diameter of circular paper with 29 little items, program instruction items, you know, a sentence, maybe 2 very short sentences with a word left out for the student to provide. If it's designed right, it's designed so that the student can provide that answer only if they've mastered or read carefully the item. A lot of people that tried to copy all this technique didn't get that. They got it so that, yeah, you got to get the answer right, but they didn't make the connection, the contingency connection. So the had to be designed so the contingency was there. It's a suitcase size, I mean, fairly large suitcase, with a small window that shows just an item at a time. The disc that contains this is under the lid there, and inside the machine. And you over here is a little space you can write the answer. You're writing it on adding machine tape, actually, that appears through a small window. You raise the lever here, which moves the answering machine tape 1 notch up. So now your answer is under a little glass plate. You move over, you're going up and now over, and that opens a little flap, essentially, that shows the correct answer. So no, wait a minute, I've got the sequence wrong. You raise up, and the thing is under glass, and you can see the answer. And if it's correct, you move it over, and it punches a hole in the tape so that we'll know that you called that one correct. Then you return the lever, and that means that item will not come back again. If you had not gotten it correct, just went up and down, it would have advanced the tape again. But after you've gone through all 29 items the first time, those that you got answered incorrectly will reappear, because there's a little detent. It's all mechanical. It's a little detent that this lever, when you go over like that, it moves the detent. So that one won't come back. You just go up and down, the detent stays, and so when this starts around again, it'll stop at that one again. If you follow all that. Ralph Burbrand's, the guy famous for cumulative recordings, ran the shop there. I mean, it was his world. And the shop was very important, but I thought maybe every psychology department in the country had a shop like this or something. I found out that's not at all true. This Austrian fellow that worked in the shop was the guy that did our work on the teaching machines. And they were far from free of failure. So he and I would often go over to the machine room in another building, and to do corrections on take care of a problem that had developed. Usually the problem most common problem that develops is that this is not electrical, it has no motors in it. So to move the disc takes some kind of power. Well, when you do this operation with the lever, you are tightening a spring, a circular kind of spring under there, so that that will provide the power for the movement of the disc when going back around, it's skipping all the items you missed and so forth. That takes some power provided by the spring. But if the spring if this has not happened enough to wind the spring tightly, you have to go open the machine with the screwdriver and correct the situation. So,
the outcomes were phenomenal, but the work to back it up would enough to discourage somebody.
Yes, yes. This was not clever enough. Computers solved that eventually, so that now you do computer-assisted instruction, and it's pretty simple.
Does computer instruction or computer-assisted instruction follow the principles of the teaching machine?
That depends on who does it and whether they're trying to follow the principles. Very often it does not. Yeah. And Skinner wrote these fantastic books that were terribly impactful on the field, but very seldom did many copies sell. I mean, it was some ridiculously small number for the behavior of organisms, for example. Small wonder, because unless you're really immersed in it, you can't understand it anyway. But even science and human behavior didn't do all that well in terms of the program that far outshined it even, which is hardly fair, because it was just a little mechanical problem that had to be solved to make it programmed. And
why haven't the teaching machines caught on, or why didn't they?
First, to have a specialized machine to teach a limited number of courses or a limited amount, it was pretty expensive. But probably the more important reason the machines didn't catch on was small, compact computers came along. Okay, so I mean, you can do it so much better with computers than you can do it with a machine that has all these tight limitations on things. Now, the tight limitation has some advantage to it, because remember, you have to have a contingent relationship between what somebody does and getting a correct answer, or reinforced for a response. And if you try to do it like in the form of questions at the end of a chapter or something like that, that's no good. I mean, it may have some kind of function, but can't do like an instructional device. So the limitation has some advantage. Though I often wish that window were a little bit bigger.
I thought about that. That's what I was thinking of, was questions at the end of a chapter. You just have to go through and look for that answer. That's without understanding any of it. Just find the answer.
It doesn't do anything to do the teaching. It makes you go dig.
It's too late.
And the program teaches. So,
What was it like to be a behavior analyst during your early years in the field?
Well, I enjoyed it very much, so I guess I would say it was fine. It was not mainstream by any means. The chairman of my department, Frank Geldard, who was a sensory psychologist of some renown, thought very negatively of it. He thought that was sort of strange stuff. It ought to be more standard, and he let it be known that that's what he felt. But Will and I and Bill weren't terribly interested in what he thought anyway. So.
How did you pull it off in a department with a chairman that wasn't too interested in what you were interested in?
Well, you can do anything you can defend, I guess.
What did you do?
Reed conducted these seminars that were very open, so he was not hostile, and that was a good environment. Beyond that, the support came from each other, and I read some of Murray Sidman's work along in there that very much influenced me also, and my dissertation was based on his work, used his work as a vehicle basically for studying very Hullian idea of summation of drives, but one of the drives, so-called, was avoidance, and I used Murray Sidman's. I had never met Murray at that point or anything either, but just sort of out there. The literature teaches itself.
I guess I'm interested in how you can conduct research in a department that is not particularly friendly to what you wanted to do.
Mm-hmm. Well, the faculty was open for you to do things that were different. As certainly Reed was supportive of doing it, and Frank Finger, who was sort of a comparative psychologist doing various kinds of comparative animal work, a lot of running wheels and one thing and another, was very influential for me too. Basically, he taught me to write. So, but he was supportive, but not at all doing related work.
What do you consider your most important contributions to behavior analysis, or what would you like to be remembered for?
Well, pretty much the first behavioral work with operant work with humans was my vigilance work, and I felt very good about that. And it was reinforcing observing responses. And,
Vic mentioned that as one of the seminal points in his interest.
Yeah. Okay. Well, basically that was the peak for me that got me going.
What about programmed learning?
Oh, yes.
I still have your book,
Uh-huh.
and I treasure it, and I've used it.
Yeah. Oh, good. You're only supposed to have to use it one time, and you know it forever.
How did you come into that?
I was invited to go to Harvard and work with Fred Skinner. and Fred Skinner, when I got there, said I got this new thing he's working on these days, and it's programmed instruction. And we worked on the analysis of behavior program. That was for his course that he was teaching. Natural Sciences 114, it was called. It was a general science-y kind of special course for non-majors, and we prepared that. He had designed this teaching machine. We had an Austrian shop worker in our shop there who built the first of the teaching machines. Well, worked on them. Actually, Ralph Gerbrands was the one that made the machines themselves, well known from his cumulative recorders and so forth. That's how it was launched. Program instruction.
Who did you go to school with there? Did you go to school with any other people who became behavior analysts?
I wasn't a student at Harvard. I came as a research fellow and was sort of a quasi-faculty. But I sat in on Skinner's seminars that he had, graduate students and things like that. It was much like being a student in some ways, but in fact I was faculty, very, very junior faculty.
Oh.
But faculty. Yeah.
Who were some of the students that were there then at the time that you were junior faculty?
Bill Morse.
Okay.
Was there.
Was Og Lindsley there?
Og Lindsley he was not a student at the time, but he was I believe that's right, he was not then a student. But yeah, Og Lindsley was there. I had a lot of interaction with Og Lindsley. He had a job out at, I could probably get the facts wrong. He had a research job in the neighborhood, as it were. Catania was there also as at that time as a student, and he would take part in our every Wednesday we had a around the table lunch meeting, and he would be there, along with Bill Morris, along with Peter Hughes, who was on faculty at Massachusetts General, I think was the right place, but it was not at Pitt itself. But they were very freewheeling kinds of, very informal. Often we would come in with fan-folded cumulative records for hours and hours and hours of cumulative recordings and flip through them at these meetings and talk about them.
What kind of teacher was Skinner?
Skinner, I saw him both at the undergraduate level and, of course, in graduate, because I assisted in a course for the undergraduate course. There he was a very good lecturer. He did not interact much with the students, and that's what he had me for. And in graduate seminars, he mainly prodded performance from the students, and very effectively. He, I don't think, cared much for teaching at either level, but it doesn't mean he didn't do it well.
Interesting. How do you think behavior analysis has changed over the years of your career?
Well, it has become very large, and with a big literature and lots of interaction and meetings and so forth. And my taste is for something a little different than that from the beginnings. I like being able to putter around with kind of independently with new ideas. I'm just stimulated just by a small group. So I haven't really kept up very well as a result of that.
If you were going to direct it, if you were going to direct behavior analysis or the direction of it, where would you take it?
I don't know. I think a field kind of takes you rather than you taking a field. Basically, it's always been that way for me. I kind of you get into it and you end up wherever you end up. I'm not sure I'm not sure how anybody plots a course of activity in a field, but some do, obviously.
Is there anything in your career you do differently? In a real sense, I wouldn't change anything that happened, but it's also true that I didn't exactly plan what was going to happen. So you just kind of go with where interests and activities carry you. You know, I know this isn't something that I'm supposed to ask, but how do you do that? You're talking about contingency-shaped behavior, aren't you? How do you make the most of that? I think that's something that a lot of us, we're in school and we follow what the books do and that kind of thing to get the degree. It sounds like you took a different tack, or you look at the world a little bit differently. How do you make the most of the contingencies?
You know, there's not much of a role for you if you really can plan it that well. I mean, it's moving with where things open that seems to work, at least for me.
How do you know what's important? How do you know what's the best path to follow?
Well, you follow what you enjoy and what you let it just let it happen.
Okay. Do you, if you could have changed anything about that environment when you were going to school, would you have preferred more structure, more contact with instructors, more anything?
Yeah. Much of the education I've been talking about came after school. I would love to have had a different collection of professors, ones that were operant in orientation and so forth. I didn't in my schooling, though I owe a lot to what I did get in it. But I really would love to have had an earlier development in behavior analysis. In my schooling, actually, my dissertation used Sidman avoidance. I only used it as a tool. In fact, I didn't even correction. I did Sidman avoidance, and while I was doing it, he published.
Okay.
But I was only doing it as a tool, and not as any not realizing the importance of that in its own right. My instructor had kind of been skeptical about how I wanted to do this. The experiment was hypothesis testing in kind of the most stupid sort, really. But I wanted to test an idea or demonstrate an idea of summation of drives, and using an avoidance drive and seeing how it could interact with a hunger drive, put the two together and so forth. Pretty dumb stuff. But the avoidance I used was that if a response had been not made in the last 10 seconds, there was a shock delivered. And if you responded sooner than that, sooner than the 10 seconds, it was delayed. And it kept on being delayed as long as you did that. Sidman avoidance. So I went ahead and did this, even though my advisor, Starling Reed, thought this was pretty dumb. Well, you don't do avoidance that way. And so I was very happy when Murray's paper in Science came out, and I could take a copy of it and flop it on my advisor's desk and say, there.
The timing was great. What areas of the field would you like to see more work done in?
Oh, the field is now gigantic, and it just builds and expands, and I'm just no authority on like where it ought to go or even where it is anymore.
What would you like to see more of?
I really don't know. Really, the good stuff will come along serendipitously, just like the old stuff did.
Okay. What do you see as the future of behavior analysis?
That's a big crystal ball too. Just where we stand now, behavior analysis is really gigantic. A group I sometimes go to their meetings of ABA, Association for Behavior Analysis, and that's I think we'll see a lot more of that. But the future as to what kind of twists and turns and where the expansions will occur, I don't know.